Welcome to Classic Storytime Hub. Tonight, we journey into the chilling depths of Anthony M. Rudd's tale, The Place of Hairy Death. This version has been carefully reimagined and rewritten in English, crafted to bring suspense and terror alive in a fresh, unforgettable way.
Not alone, Señor. If I carried the strength of two men in my arms and the boldness of youth upon my face, I would still never descend into those ancient tunnels. Trouble waits there, I can feel it. In the dripping caverns beneath Croschampaña, death hides in every slime-choked crevice. Down there, courage is not enough. You need a companion who will not falter when shadows close in. I have walked part way into that darkness many years ago. Every young man in Quintana Roo once did, lured by the legend of treasure, a chamber of gold and bones. Not the worthless ore that remains today, but heavy nuggets sealed in rotten stone. And with that gold, the bodies of the Indians who labored for the conquistadores, entombed forever in the earth's bowels. My first descent was brief, terror driving me back to daylight. But the second time, death reached out with hairy fingers. I did not return alone. A swarm of horrors followed me, crawling into my dreams for 30 years. Even now, when I eat my fill at nightfall, I know what visions will come. Yet the Señor shrugs, hot-blooded, like all Americanos. He seeks knowledge, not the warnings of an old man. 50 pesos is enough to tempt me, for hunger is a cruel master. If he finds a brave comrade, I will guide them halfway, no further. I will wait in the room of many craters, with fire to keep the dark at bay. That room, I believe it lies at the midpoint, a vast bubble in the rock where the Indians once lived without daylight. Hundreds of them worked there, circling endlessly, pushing tree trunks to grind the rotten ore. Their footsteps carved the floor into round pits, silent scars of endless toil. There is an old tale, Señor, a tale with too many signs of truth to dismiss. In the days when ships came rarely, not like now when steam drives them across the seas like water beetles, the gold mine from the rotten ore had to be hidden for months. No fortress stood above ground, so the treasure was carried deep through a secret passage, locked away in a barren chamber where guards kept watch without rest. That chamber was found once, yet its unimaginable hoard of yellow gold still lies untouched. To reach it, one must first move a skeleton, no frail bones of my people, but the remains of a youth strong and fair, with eyes as blue as your own, Señor, and hair like sunlight. He was quick to laugh once, but when we reached the room of craters, his smile vanished. Down there, the air is hot, heavy, and wet. A foul stench clings to the walls, sinking a man's courage into his boots. I remember watching those two men leave me by my fire in that cavern. I crossed myself and prayed for their return. I thought nothing of the gold they promised me, my share of all I could carry. No, my heart was bound to the one with the blue eyes, the one my mother's people would have worshipped in the old days. For him, I would have done anything, except follow him deeper into that place of hairy death. Not even loyalty could drag me farther. They vanished into the wet dark, and only one returned, the wrong one. You must understand, Señor, this tale is stitched together from fragments, but the truth is clear enough. There was no hatred between them, no jealousy. One was strong but poor. The other was weak, yet heir to millions of Americano gold. He should never have risked his health, his mind, his very life for more wealth. But such is the way of the world. No one is ever satisfied. The blue-eyed man, always quick to laugh, was the superintendent of the vast Genequan rope factory in Valladolid, 40 miles north in Yucatan. You know the place, senor. The narrow-gauge railway ends there, at the heart of the plantations. That factory and nearly 200 square miles of Genequan fields belong to the Americano father of the second man, young Senor Lester Ainsley, dark-skinned and delicate. His father disapproved of him, believing the boy needed to rough it in the jungle, fewer cigarettes, less wine, and more hard labor under the sun. But one look told me the truth. One day cutting Genequan in that blistering heat would kill him. Fathers are strange creatures. They marry fragile women, then demand their own strength in their sons, though nature rarely obeys such wishes. Senor Jim Coulter, the blond laughing one, was 28, though he looked scarcely older than Lester. The boy had just turned 21, celebrating with too much drink, and the shadows of that indulgence still lingered beneath his eyes. His father's patience had run out. He sent Lester south to work among the peons, men beaten into servitude for generations. It was a cruel demand, impossible to fulfill. Coulter, the superintendent, sent frantic telegrams. He knew the frail young man would not survive the fields and feared being held responsible. In the end, a compromise was struck. Coulter would take a month's leave from the factory and accompany Lester into the jungle. Somewhere, Coulter had heard whispers of a treasure vault hidden deep in the Madre de Oro mine, 2,000 feet beneath the ancient temple at Croscenpana. The tale was old to me, senor, old and perhaps true. When they sought me out, knowing I had once braved these ancient tunnels at the risk of my life, I warned them. No man had ever gone far enough to find the treasure chamber. But their excitement was unshaken. What were collapsing walls to them? What were vipers, 1,000 scorpions with armored tails, or the monstrous conejos, the leaping spiders the Americanos called tarantulas? You frown, senor, and say tarantulas are not deadly. Perhaps. Yet I knew a man bitten on the ear who survived only because he cut away the flesh with a knife. Better to lose part of an ear than life itself. The conejos of the Madre de Oro mine are not like the spiders that feed on bananas. These are larger, pale, whitish pink, and blind. They need no eyes. They leap unerringly through the dark at whatever they wish to bite. The descent to the room of craters is short in distance, though long in suffering. Once, perhaps, the Spaniards walked the slanting menways in an hour, aided by rough ladders. But when I led the two young Americanos down, it took us 10 times that span. Bound together by rope, we crawled and slid through the choking passages. I carried a heavy broom of wire-bound twigs, striking ahead before each step, sweeping aside vipers and scorpions, clearing the way before forcing myself feet first through narrow apertures where rotten rock fell at my touch. Remember this, senor. In such passages, one must always go feet first. If unseen creatures strike, they waste their venom on boots or on thighs wrapped in thick paper beneath heavy trousers. And if the rock slides, it is easier to retreat. Senor Jim followed close behind me, his lantern blazing against the suffocating dark. A smaller lamp, meant for my use in the room of craters, swung from his belt beside the rope that bound us together. Senor Lester came last, clutching a miner's pick to break through sealed passages. Suddenly, a slab of rock, thin as slate but heavy as death, fell without warning and pinned me flat. The vibrations of our steps had jarred it loose. Jim was quick, striking with the pick to free me. Yet I heard him lash out 3 times, not at the stone, but at something else. He cursed, his voice trembling with wonder. "Fastest thing I ever saw," he muttered. Behind him, Lester whimpered. I knew then what he had faced. The first of the sickly white spiders, the conejos. I had warned them, but warnings mean little until a man sees those sightless hairy monsters for himself. They leap through the dark with uncanny precision, dodging even bullets, some say. Only then does one understand the terror they bring.
From that moment, the spiders grew more numerous. We shouted, hurled stones ahead, driving them back into their crevices. For if one creature bites, the others know instantly. They swarm, burying their prey beneath a tide of albino hunger. Long before we reached the room of craters, Lester was undone. Terror, foul air, and choking heat had broken him. He begged Jim to turn back, trembling like a child. But Jim mocked the dangers, laughing short, defiant laughs soon to be silenced. Lester stumbled, repped, crawled. He dropped the pick, and we did not notice until we needed it. Exhausted, we retraced our steps to recover the tool. At last, we reached the room of craters. There, among the ancient logs once used by Indian slaves to grind ore, we built a fire. For a moment, there was safety. And Jim, ever steadfast, tried to breathe courage back into his broken companion. I could have told him it was useless, but in those days I was young, and it was not my place to advise. Lester quieted for a time, though every few minutes his frail body shook with violent shudders. I was glad I had made it clear. I would go no farther. My pesos were earned, and I cared little whether they found gold or not. I had once ventured a few yards beyond this point, into a narrow passage I believed led to the treasure chamber. I knew what waited there, white hairy death. So I stayed by my fire of punk logs, eating from my small pack, sleeping and waiting through the endless hours. My thoughts were hideous, though none as terrible as the truth. What I know of what followed, Senor, comes mostly from the ravings of a man I was forced to hear. In that narrow, obstructed passage, the 2 young men fought their way forward. How Jim managed to drag Lester so far I cannot guess. Yet they pressed on until they reached a blank wall, centuries old, built by Spaniards to seal away their treasure, and the slaves who mined it. A single hole pierced the wall. Perhaps desperate prisoners had clawed that much, only to meet a swordsman waiting outside, ready to sever their reaching arms. Lester collapsed on the rock floor, too weak to help. Jim took up the pick, sweating, pausing often to sweep aside the spiders that swarmed at this depth. At last, he broke a hole wide enough for a man to crawl through feet first. He raised the lantern, and the chamber beyond blazed into view. The treasure house! His shout at the sight of gold, piles spilled from rotted sacks into a gleaming mountain, roused Lester, who staggered to his feet. Together they saw not only the hoard of gold, but pale tracings across the floor, the remains of bones, long since crumbled, of the slaves entombed with their master's wealth. Yes, Senor, it was the storehouse of treasure.
In his frenzy, Jim forgot the caution that had carried him farther than any other man. He wriggled into the hole he had carved, desperate to reach the treasure. He might have made it, had the rock not shifted. Just 6 inches, no more. But it was enough. The stone clamped around his waist, pinning him helpless, suspended above the floor. Lester cried out in terror, but Jim kept his head. "Break me out, quick!" he gasped. "It's crushing me. The pick, strike above me there." He nodded, his arms trapped, unable to point. Lester tried, whimpering, trembling, barely able to lift the pick. And that was when the first horror struck. A pale, hairy shape dropped from the ceiling, landing squarely on Jim's face. His scream tore through the passage, first horror, then pain, then the dreadful realization that this was the end. Before his cry had faded, the others came, leaping from the walls, bounding from the floor, pouring from the roof, the albino horde. And Lester's last shred of courage shattered. He jerked back on the rope that bound him to his doomed companion, sawing at it with his knife. When it snapped, he fled, screaming to drown out the smothering sounds behind him. That is not the end, Senor. I heard the tale only later, after I had slept safely in the room of craters. It took the young Americano 7 or 8 hours to claw his way back to me. There was no hope for Jim. I carried Lester to the blessed daylight, though his collapse slowed us to a day and a night's journey. His mind was broken. He raved endlessly of his friend's death, repeating the same words again and again. I was relieved when his grieving father arrived from the United States to take him home, where doctors might mend what was left of him. But nearly a year later, a scarecrow came to my hut. It was Lester, ragged, hollow-eyed, clutching a sheaf of money. He begged me, bribed me to descend once more into the old mine, into the place of hairy death.
Válgame Dios, not for $1 million of Americano gold would I have gone back then. The fear was too fresh upon me. But Lester threw back his head, his voice trembling. Then I must go alone. I can never rest until I bring up Jim's body. I was a coward. I am a coward. That is true, I admitted. But there are many cowards. What difference does it make now? He was resolute in words, but not in deeds. Days passed. He lingered in my hut, a nervous shadow of himself. He flinched at the crow of a rooster, at the slam of a door. He was weaker than when I first met him. I learned he had escaped from a sanatorium up north, returning here in secret. I resolved to send word to his father. I was a bachelor then, Senor. The little spiders spun their webs across the rafters, and I did not care. The mice scurried freely at night, for my striped cat was old and fat, too lazy to hunt. But Lester could not endure it. His sudden shrieks forced me to climb with a broom, sweeping away the webs again and again. "I can't stand them," he wailed, shuddering. I thought then there was little danger he would ever return to the Madre de Oro mine. And I was right. He never did. That night, as I slept on the floor, I was jolted awake. Lester had leapt up, screaming, a scream unlike any I hope to hear again. He thrashed wildly. I lit a lamp and saw him collapse. His body stiffened, head arched back. "It bit me. I killed it," he shrieked. Then came a final shudder, and he went limp, dead. Too fast, even for the venom of a pit viper. I searched for the cause. His hands were clenched tight, but in death they relaxed. I pried them apart, and my heart sank. Between his thin, trembling palms lay the crushed body of a small mouse. He had been dreaming of the hairy spiders, Senor, and in that dream death claimed him.
And thus the story ended. If you liked this journey into the worlds of classic literature, do not forget to support us by subscribing so we can tell you more.
And hey, if there's a classic tale you'd love to hear, told in this suspenseful style, drop its name in the comments below. Your suggestion might be our next chilling adventure.